Rick Carter adjusted his tie in the grimy bathroom mirror of a Budapest nightclub, muttering under his breath. His mission had gone to hell the moment he stepped inside. What was supposed to be a routine surveillance gig had turned into a chaotic brawl because of him. The fight had started with a misunderstanding. A Russian arms dealer mistook Rick for an MI6 agent when, in reality, he was just an underpaid intelligence grunt sent to watch and report. The problem? Rick had a habit of opening his mouth at the wrong time. "Why the hell would I be MI6? Do I look like I own a good suit?" he had quipped, right before someone broke a bottle over his head. Somewhere between dodging punches and using a bottle of vodka as a makeshift weapon, his pants had torn wide open. Not in a minor rip kind of way. No, this was a full-on crotch explosion. Every Russian in the room suddenly stopped, eyes locked on the unexpected reveal. It was ridiculous. It was humiliating. But most importantly, it was distracting. The confusion allowed a group of actual CIA operatives to storm the building, taking down the arms dealers while Rick stood there, pants barely hanging on, looking like the world's least threatening exhibitionist. "Jesus Christ, Carter," his boss had groaned back at headquarters. "You're a walking diplomatic crisis waiting to happen." That should have been the end of it. A slap on the wrist, a couple of weeks stuck at a desk. But no, Rick's unique talent had caught the attention of someone high up. Days later, he found himself in a sterile government lab, sitting across from a group of scientists who all looked way too excited. "We're going to turn you into the world's first biometric human lie detector," Dr. Patel announced, way too cheerfully. Rick leaned back in his chair, unimpressed. "Uh-huh. And how exactly does that work?" Dr. Patel exchanged looks with her team before one of them hesitantly explained. "You, have a specific physiological response to certain stimuli. And we found a way to enhance that." Rick squinted. "Stimuli?" Another scientist cleared his throat. "Let's just say, when you're excited, your body naturally reacts. We've implanted a neural stimulator in your nervous system that lets us track micro-expressions and heartbeat changes. When aroused, you can detect lies with absolute accuracy." Silence. Rick blinked. "Are you saying my dick is now a polygraph?" "Essentially, yes." It took him a solid 10 seconds to process that. Then, "You guys have way too much government funding." Unfortunately, he didn't have a choice. The implant was already inside him, and within hours, they started testing it. It wasn't subtle. A very attractive assistant would read a statement, and Rick had to tell whether it was true or false. If it was a lie, his indicator responded. The first few tests were fine. Then they decided to bring in Dr. Patel. She walked in wearing a lab coat that barely hid the fact that she was built like a damn supermodel. "Testing, Agent Carter," she said, clicking her pen. "I am 60 years old." Rick chuckled. "Bullshit." The implant vibrated softly in his spine, confirming the lie. So far, so good. Then she leaned in, her voice dropping a little. "I'm not wearing anything under this coat." Rick felt a jolt through his entire body. His eye twitched. His body stiffened. A monitor beeped frantically. The entire team cheered. 100% accuracy. Patel grinned, jotting down notes. Rick groaned, rubbing his temples. "I'm in hell." But the CIA wasn't done yet. "Oh no." "Congratulations, Carter," his handler, Agent Brooks, said later that evening, slapping a thick folder onto his desk. "You're going on your first mission." He didn't even look up. "Please tell me it's a regular mission. Like hacking or paperwork." "I kill for paperwork." Brooks smirked. "Sorry. You're meeting Natasha Volkov." Rick's stomach dropped. Natasha Volkov wasn't just any spy. She was the spy. The femme fatale. The woman who had single-handedly taken down 3 different intelligence agencies, using nothing but seduction and zero mercy. Rick rubbed his temples. And you want me to, what? Out-seduce her? You just need to get close enough to activate your lie detector and find out what she's planning, Brooks said, amused. We're setting you up with a cover identity. You'll meet her at a casino in Monaco. Play it cool. Stay in control. Rick snorted. Right. Control. I'm gonna be fine. Totally fine. Spoiler, he was not going to be fine. The casino in Monaco was everything Rick hated: opulence, wealth, and too many people who thought they were smarter than everyone else. He adjusted his tuxedo, already regretting his life choices. His mission was simple: sit at the high-stakes poker table, let Natasha Volkov make her move, and subtly test if she was lying about her rumored arms deal. Simple. Except for one problem. Natasha was distractingly gorgeous. She entered the room like she owned it, wrapped in a blood-red dress that made half the casino forget their own names, Rick included. She moved with the kind of confidence that told men they would beg, and she might let them. Every step was a calculated tease, a deliberate taunt to a world too weak to handle her. Rick swallowed hard. This is fine. This is totally fine. She took a seat across from him, lighting a cigarette like she was in a noir film. Mr. Carter, she purred. I've heard so much about you. Rick forced a smirk. All lies, I assure you. Her eyes flickered with amusement. Oh, I hope not. The game began. Cards, chips, strategy, none of it mattered. This was a seduction disguised as poker. She leaned in at all the right moments, her perfume clouding his brain. Every touch of her fingers against the chips was just enough to be suggestive. Rick tried to focus. He was here to make her reveal lies, not fall for them. So, she said, casually playing her hand, I hear the CIA has been upgrading its agents lately. Rick's heart stopped. He kept his face neutral. You hear a lot of things. She tilted her head, studying him like a cat watching a trapped mouse. They say American men have enhancements. His spine prickled. Did she know? Was she testing him? Rick shifted in his seat, forcing a smirk. And what exactly have you heard? She exhaled slowly, her lips curling into something sinful. That your body reacts to lies. That if I were to tell you something untrue. She trailed a perfectly manicured nail along the rim of her glass. Your body would betray you. Rick's blood turned to ice. She knew. She had no proof, but she knew. And now, she was playing a game to break him. He needed to stay calm. In control. I think you've been misinformed, he said smoothly. Her lips parted in a slow, knowing smile. Then let's test it. His pulse slammed against his ribs. Test what, exactly? She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. I've never imagined you naked. The implant jolted his nervous system. A soft beep sounded from the tracking device hidden in his watch. He clenched his jaw. She grinned. Interesting, she mused, eyes sparkling with mischief. So that was a lie. Rick fought the urge to groan. Congratulations, you broke science. She laughed, rolling a chip between her fingers. Let's try another. I find you completely unattractive. Another jolt. The CIA team listening in through his earpiece was probably dying with laughter. Rick ran a hand down his face. I hope you're enjoying this. She propped her chin on her hand. Oh, I am. This was spiraling. He needed to turn it back on her. He exhaled and leaned in. Fine. Let's play. You claim you have no plans to sell those weapons to our enemies. Her smile didn't falter. Oh, darling. I'm just a simple businesswoman. The implant stayed silent. Rick's stomach twisted. No reaction. She was telling the truth. Shit. Either the intelligence was wrong, or she was a bigger player in this game than they realized. Her lips curved. What's wrong, Agent? Did I break your little toy? He needed leverage. A way to turn the tables. Rick leaned back, forcing a slow, cocky smile. Nah. Just thinking about how much fun it'll be when I make you crack. Her eyes darkened with challenge. Oh, darling. She lifted her glass to her lips. You're welcome to try. Rick had survived gunfights, explosions, and a particularly aggressive ex-girlfriend. But nothing, not even CIA training, had prepared him for a psychological striptease in Monaco, orchestrated by a woman who could unravel a man with a single smirk. Natasha wasn't just playing a game. She was playing him. And worse, she knew it. He had to flip the script. He took a slow sip of his drink, letting the burn settle before speaking. You enjoy breaking men, don't you? Her red lips curled. Only the ones who think they're unbreakable. Damn, she was good. He had to be better. Rick leaned forward just enough to close the space between them. And how many have actually survived you? She tilted her head, amused. None with their dignity intact. He smirked. Guess I'll be the first. Her eyes flickered with something dangerous. Challenge accepted. The game continued, tension thick enough to choke on. Every question she answered without triggering his implant made his gut twist. Either she was being honest, or she was so deep in this game that she believed her own lies. Either way, Rick was losing ground. And then she shifted gears. Her voice softened, gaze dropping to his lips. You know, she murmured, I've never met a man quite like you. Rick felt his pulse spike. Her fingers trailed along the rim of her glass. Dangerous. Smart. Amusingly cocky. Her nails clicked softly against the crystal. And yet, something tells me you're still holding back. Rick forced a smirk. Maybe I just enjoy the suspense. Her gaze darkened. Or maybe you're afraid of what happens when you don't. The heat in her voice was deliberate, calculated, a slow seduction designed to melt resolve. Rick held his ground. Barely. You tried to distract me, Natasha? She exhaled a soft laugh. Oh, sweetheart. If I wanted to distract you, we wouldn't be talking anymore. The implant in his spine hummed, a reminder that arousal heightened its sensitivity. He needed to turn this around before he became another notch in her metaphorical, and possibly literal, belt. Rick's lips curved. And yet, you're still here. Talking. He let his gaze flick down just enough to make her notice. Almost like you're the one hesitating. For the first time, Natasha's expression faltered. Just for a second. Rick pounced. What's the matter? Not used to someone pushing back? Her lips parted slightly. Careful, Agent Carter. He leaned in, lowering his voice to a murmur. Why? Are you lying right now? Her breath hitched. The implant gave a tiny jolt. Bingo. Rick grinned. Huh? Looks like someone's nervous. She quickly masked it, but he saw the flicker of frustration in her eyes. She wasn't as in control as she thought. Good. He pushed further. What happens when the woman who breaks men realizes she's met one who won't bend? She stared at him, fingers tightening around her glass. Then, slowly, her expression shifted. The playful seductress vanished. In her place stood the real Natasha Volkov. Cold. Calculating. A woman who didn't just play games, she won them. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You're very good, Agent Carter. Rick felt the shift like a storm rolling in. But, she continued, standing gracefully, so am I. She turned, walking away with the kind of confidence that suggested the game wasn't over. Rick exhaled, watching her disappear into the crowd. His watch vibrated, his handler checking in. He didn't answer. because for the first time all night, he wasn't sure if he had won or if he had just walked straight into a bigger trap. Rick sat in his hotel room, shirt undone, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand, and an uneasy weight settling in his gut. He had played the game, pushed back, even managed to crack Natasha's mask for a second, but had it been enough? She was a master manipulator, and if she had let him think he'd won, then he hadn't. His watch vibrated again. This time he answered. A gruff voice on the other end. Carter. Status? Rick took a slow sip. She's interested. A pause. Sexually or strategically? Rick smirked. Little of both. Good. Then reel her in. Rick set the glass down, rubbing a hand down his face. He already knew what came next. Natasha was too smart to be seduced into talking outright. He'd have to push her into a corner, make her think she needed him. That meant raising the stakes, getting closer, riskier, and walking the fine line between control and chaos. A knock on his door made him pause. He checked the time. 2:34 a.m. Too late for room service. Too early for an ambush. Rick opened the door, keeping one hand near the gun tucked behind his back. Natasha stood there, barefoot, a silk robe tied loosely around her, hair tousled like she'd just woken up, or just been somewhere she shouldn't have been. Rick arched a brow. Lost? She smiled, stepping inside without waiting for permission. Not at all. The scent of jasmine and expensive perfume followed her, mixing with the alcohol in his room. She moved to the window, gazing out at the Monaco skyline like she owned it. Rick shut the door. To what do I owe the pleasure? She turned, the dim light catching the sharp curve of her smirk. I wanted to see if you meant what you said earlier. He let his gaze drag down, deliberately slow. You'll have to be more specific. She stepped closer. That you don't break. Rick chuckled. And you came all the way here just to test that theory? She reached out, running a finger along his collarbone, just under the undone buttons of his shirt. A woman likes to be sure. His implant buzzed in warning. His pulse quickened. She was too close, too damn enticing, and she knew it. Rick swallowed, keeping his voice even. Is this a seduction or an interrogation? Natasha leaned in, her lips inches from his ear. Can't it be both? The implant hummed, heat building in his spine. He clenched his fists. He needed to turn this around now. Rick caught her wrist, holding it firmly. Careful. She tilted her head. Of what? He leaned in, their noses almost touching. You might like what you find. Something flickered in her eyes. Not fear, curiosity. He had her attention. Rick loosened his grip, tracing his fingers down her wrist instead. Slow. Controlled. Watching her reaction now. Her breath hitched. Barely. But he caught it. His smirk deepened. See? It works both ways. Natasha held his gaze for a long moment. Then, she stepped back, smoothing her robe as if regaining control. Interesting. Rick crossed his arms. What's the verdict? She smiled. Undecided. Liar. But he let her have that. She turned for the door. Good night, Agent Carter. Rick waited until she was gone before exhaling. He ran a hand through his hair, glancing at his reflection in the window. The game wasn't just dangerous anymore. It was personal.